Have you tried ChatGPT for estimating and concluded it was useless? Chances are you're expecting too much from it and giving it too little information. If you ask ChatGPT to estimate the cost of building a road without any other context, it'll do an absolutely terrible job. If you tell it where the road is, the key quantities, design details, surrounding features, it'll do a better job. If you give it access to your full activity template library, production rates, cost rates, and specify the standard process you follow for estimating and the desired output format, it's probably going to do a half-decent job at giving you a first draft price. Estimating is year 8 math. It's multiplying quantities and rates together in a structured format. The current AI models are smart enough to do this. The issue is not intelligence. The hard part of construction estimating is determining correct construction methodology for your project, analyzing the drawings and accurately measuring all the quantities, getting together all the correct data like production rates, cost rates, subcontractor quotes, and then finally playing the game of quoting jobs to make sure your price isn't too high, but also not too low. So AI cannot replace every one of these steps, but across this entire process of preparing a construction estimate, there are some very useful applications that you should be aware of. My name is Tim, and after a decade of working in both big and small construction projects across a variety of industries, I've recently gone all in on building an AI-powered construction estimating and contract management platform. So I know exactly how these tools work, and I spent a lot of time experimenting with different ways to use them. In this video, I'm going to give you 9 ways you can apply and use AI in your construction estimating. So this video, I really want to focus on how AI should be used for estimating, because I think a lot of people overhype the applications and use it in places they should. For example, I think quantity takeoffs is something that people should do, not AI tools. So yeah, I really want to focus on how AI should be used and what tasks it can help replace, rather than blindly just saying you should rely on AI estimates, because I don't think that is the use case of AI for estimating. Also, AI is much more than ChatGPT. Yes, ChatGPT, I think, is good at certain things, but the main AI tools I use and that I've found a lot of success with these sort of tasks are Claude, which is their reasoning model is very good at maths and structured output. Gemini, the Google model, is really good at visual and image analysis. Plus, it has a massive context window, so you can give it a lot of information and it will be able to accurately use that data. What do the other models say? They have a big context window, but I've found that the more information you give them, the more things they start to miss. But Gemini, the massive context window, actually seems to be very, very good. Final one, which is not an AI tool, but Airtable, I think is it's sort of like Microsoft Excel on steroids. And it has an AI chat feature. So any tasks, so for example, this is Airtable, and I'll go through the interface in a second, but any tasks where you're doing sort of data analysis or collection, I prefer using Airtable than any of the other AI tools. All right, the first use case of AI in construction estimating is to help you systematize your estimates. A lot of companies I've seen basically start every single estimate again from scratch. The reality is that 70 to 80% of your estimates will be almost exactly the same. And I don't mean exactly the same in terms of the price. I mean exactly the same in terms of the structure, the process, and the data that's used to prepare the estimate. So a very simple use case of AI is take 5 of your previous Excel estimates and ask AI to help you convert them into standard activity templates, production rate libraries, cost libraries, a BOQ structure, and also a standardized letter of offer that details all of your key inclusions and exclusions. The reason this is useful, and you could do it yourself, it'll just take longer, but AI, I find, is very good at data analysis and extracting and structuring data. So if you take all your old estimates and you want to put into a concise template or production rate library, that is a very good use case of AI. I would do this in Airtable because I love the data format of Airtable and I love how it allows you to structure and collate your data. So this is an example of activity template library where you have all the different tasks you would reuse in all your different estimates. So for example, clearing and grubbing, earthworks, trenching, trench excavation, backfill, pipeline. Each task, you have a set of resources, the materials required, a production rate, and a unit of measure. Now you can break this down a lot more. For each of your trench excavation tasks, you could have a different trench type, trench width, trench depth. Again, depends on the type of business you're in and what sort of work you're doing. you could also break out these resources in a lot more detail. So this is a very small example. It's only got 20 line items. You could have 100 or 1,000 different items, depending on all the different types of estimates you've done. Then the reason I think this is good in Airtable is that you can simply ask it to find certain bits of information for you or to find certain activities that you want to use in your estimate. To create this, you basically just create a new database, and then you can upload your old estimates directly into the Airtable chat feature, ask it to extract the data, and then use it to create your own production rate library, which is just going to help you to systematize and stop you pricing everything again from scratch. Okay, so the second use case of AI in construction estimating solves the problem of your client sending you 200-page tender documents, drawings, specifications, a whole lot of probably irrelevant information, asking you to price it in a couple of days when you physically don't have, in the time they've given you, enough time to go through all the documents. AI is very good at taking a huge amount of data and information, and with a well-structured prompt, extracting the information that you actually care about. So you can upload all of your tender information into a new chat in something like Gemini. Gemini is the best for this task because Gemini has a huge context window, meaning you can give it a lot of information and it can use that information effectively. Ask it to extract things like the scope, the requirements, the key specifications, any key risky clauses, or anything out of the ordinary. Now, this feature, and I have to shamelessly plug it, is what Optimum is built off in terms of the tender summary feature. So you can upload your tender documents and drawings, and it'll transform it into a structured summary that's the same for all of your projects. Now, a similar but extended use case of this would be to apply that same process to a set of construction drawings. And again, because Gemini 3, the Google AI Pro, is very good at visual reasoning, with a well-structured prompt, you can extract relevant pricing information and quantities within reason from the drawings. Now, AI can't reliably perform quantity takeoff. Something that we think would be relatively simple, like taking a scale and applying it to a structure, is difficult for AI, or something like tracing a conduit through a wall across drawings is actually a very complicated task, and AI can't quite do that yet. But what it can do is it can extract things like construction notes, identify specific materials and finishes, spot inconsistencies, flag access issues, but also count tags and measurements, so it can identify that this structure is in fact a slab, and those measurements relate to the length and width of the structure. Or if you're looking at something like a lighting layout drawing and it's got a tag for each of the light fittings like L1, L2, L3, it can very accurately count those. So to use this feature, you can use a prompt like extract all the pricing, impacting notes, materials, constraints, and inconsistencies, rely on labels over scaled measurements, and count text rather than shapes. A prompt like that will actually get you quite a good data extraction from your drawings. Again, this feature is built into Optimum, so you can upload your construction drawings and turn them into a structured pricing somewhere like this with quantities, key construction notes, and methodologies. But you can also do a pretty decent job of it of using the Google AI Gemini 3 Pro. Okay, the next thing I think you can do very well with AI is to build a first draft estimate. So if we think about the estimating process, we take a tender package, we understand what our client's asking us to price, we then go through, break the project down, create a pricing schedule. Doing that breakdown of taking the project scope and creating a pricing schedule and measuring quantities, I think is a human task, because if you're pricing a project, you want to understand the scope and you want to structure it the right way. But once you do have pricing schedule created, you can get AI to build your first draft. So for example, you break your commercial construction project down into earthworks, concrete, structural steel, fit out, services, whatever. Once you've got that breakdown, you've measured any key quantities, then using a well-crafted prompt and giving as context that breakdown of the project with the quantities, the tender specifications and package, and your own activity template library. So something like this, which contains all your key cost rates and materials, you can then feed that into an AI model and get it to prepare your first draft price in a consistent structure. So I used Claude for this task because Claude is by far the best at managing data and structured input and output. So as context, I gave it my production rate library, my activity templates, I gave it the tender documents, and then I gave it the pricing schedule I wanted to fill out with key quantities. And I told it to output the estimate in a structured Excel format that I can download and then edit. The reason this is good, because if they just give you an estimate in a chat, can't really do that much with it. At least with this, I can download it and edit and change it and review it as I want. The other thing I should have mentioned before that is important when you're prompting it is I'll always ask it before it does anything to ask any clarifying questions and to basically work out what it doesn't know and what assumptions it needs to make. And then against each of these items, I'll tell it to create a separate tab for each of the pricing schedule items so I can see this detailed breakdown and the costs. Again, if all of these rates are coming, what did it do there? If all these rates are coming from your cost database and it's structuring your task, for example, that structure for the earthworks task is coming from your production rate library, it's using your cost rates, your productivities based on the volumes you've given in the bill of quantities. All it's really doing is, as I said at the start, very basic maths where it's looking at a task, determining what task category that fits into, looking at the quantities and structure it's given you, and then applying the rates to it. So really, it's not a very complicated task for it to do. And because it's outputting it in a format that you're familiar with, it's very easy for you to go back, edit, and change things. Now, the other thing I'm stressing is that is a first draft estimate. I think it is crazy. It would be crazy to purely rely on the output of AI to submit a $10, $15 million, $500,000 quote. Because at the end of the day, it's your money on the line. I wouldn't be blindly trusting AI. If again, you just think through this process of giving it the process you want it to follow to prepare the estimate, telling it the structure and the output, giving it the correct input information to get access to, answering any questions, telling it where to make assumptions, and it will do a pretty good job at doing this. The next use case is once you have prepared your construction estimate, to audit your estimate for errors, gaps, and risk. This was the whole use case that I built Opera about. And there's actually a body of research that shows, ironically, that generative AI isn't best at the best use of generative AI isn't for generating information. It's for checking people's output. And I thought this was fascinating. And I'll see if I can find it. There is quite a lot of research coming out that's saying one of the best, where AI performs the best, is where it's checking something rather than producing something. So AI is perfect for checking things like missing scope, duplications, understanding the allowances you've made, provisional sums, determining contract risks, and checking your entire estimate. Now, this is built out properly in Opera, where you can analyze the estimate you've prepared and compare it to your tender packages, but you can also do it in a tool like Claude, just with a simple prompt to upload your Excel estimate and compare your pricing schedule to the tender docs to identify errors, risks, and missing items. Again, Claude 4.5 Opus is very good at this task. You could also potentially use Gemini if you have a really, really big tender package, because Gemini, again, has that massive context window that it uses effectively. If you are a general contractor or a business that predominantly subcontracts out your work, AI is very good at supporting the procurement process. Again, I wouldn't necessarily use it to draft or write scopes of works. Where I would be using it is to review subcontractor quotes. Any quote you get back from a subcontractor will have a letter of offer with their standard inclusions and exclusions. Depending on how well you drafted your scope of works and procurement package, chances are some of these contractors will have different inclusions, exclusions, gaps, assumptions, hidden risks, and so on. Now, a good use case of AI here is to automate the subcontractor quote comparison. So you get 3 quotes for earthworks. Everyone has slightly different exclusions or inclusions. Basically, upload your attached quotes, get them to give you a clean comparison table. Now, again, it depends how big the tender package is, but I would use Gemini 3 Pro for this, and I would upload your procurement package as context, so the scope of works and drawings that you've created. These would be the baseline requirements, and then in the prompt, I would get it to compare the quotes against these requirements to identify and price the specific exclusions to each package. It's also worth reinforcing that when you get it to price the adjustments or the exclusions, you want it to basically use as context for the exclusions, uses context to price these exclusions, the subcontractor's quote, because then it would be able to do a relatively accurate job. If you ask any contractor Should you do a risk analysis on your tender submissions? Everybody would say yes, but the reality is big tenders, small amounts of time, they end up never getting done. So again, use AI in the same way you can use it to check for errors in your estimates. Just use it for an additional layer of protection and use it to help you identify key risks that you should be covered. Again, you should scan the documents yourself. You should look at the scope of work. You should understand all this stuff. But again, I think using AI as an additional layer of protection to help you pick up anything you could have missed is a very good use case. So if you upload all the tender documents and you ask it to scan for things like latent conditions, constructability issues, temporary works requirements that you might have missed, access constraints, any key contractual cost items or risks, and basically get it to give you an output in some sort of structured table ranked from highest to lowest priority that you should be addressing in your estimate. Again, I would like Gemini 3 Pro for this because of the big context window. This next use case is simply an enhancement of the tender summary we went through before, but as a follow-on from that, once it's analyzed your tender documents, looked at the drawings, just ask it to generate any clarifying questions for a tender RFI. This is basically saying, can you help me identify any gaps, anything I should request from my client? And you should be doing this yourself. You'll naturally come across these gaps at the start of the estimate, but the fact that you can analyze the tender package relatively quickly and simply, you can actually get these RFIs off very, very quickly after you receive the tender package, rather than having to wait till you're in the process of doing the estimate. You might only have a day or two before you submit. So being able to get a list of RFIs or clarifications from your client as early as possible is going to help you pricing off imperfect data. Now, the final use case and the first one that I actually recommend using ChatGPT for, because ChatGPT is, I find, the best one at writing in your own style. You can actually use AI to draft your tender submission. You can use it. It depends what your client wants you to submit, but if they want a methodology, a program description, how you're doing your temporary works, quality and safety plans, but most importantly, and I think AI does a very good job at this, is to help it create your letter of offer. You don't know, your letter of offer is your clarification to your submissions, where you detail your inclusions and your exclusions. I think GPT 5.1 is good at this because it helps, it writes in a very natural style that sounds similar to what I think I would sound like or you would sound like. And basically you give it as your tender, you give it your tender summary, your estimate, and you help it to identify anything you've missed and anything you should clarify in your offer. Okay, so I know that was a super brief summary, but the key takeaway again is I think AI is very much limited by the information we give it and the creative ways in which we use it. So again, my recommendation is to experiment, try new things, see what works, see what doesn't work. But importantly, if it doesn't give you the output you want, don't automatically assume AI isn't capable of doing it. My recommendation would be to try and figure out how to get AI to give you the output it wants, rather than just automatically assuming that it can't. So in summary, AI can't do everything, but it can do a lot. And I firmly believe there are some activities such as quantity takeoffs, preparing the overall pricing schedule, or actually putting together and structuring and reviewing an estimate should still be done by the person, because at the end of the day, estimating is a task that has an unbelievable amount of risk associated with it, but you can use AI through the entire estimating process to help you structure your workflow, use it combined with human judgment, and ultimately get faster and more accurate construction estimates.